Hello friends, Duncan here. I'd like to present a short video for you today on trip planning for the first time to Baja California Sur. When you first look at it, sometimes it can really be a daunting task to try to determine where you want to go. And I have come up with a 4-step process, not rocket science, but basically a process that you can go through to help narrow the choices down of where you would like to go, what you would like to do. Everybody's different. You each have different desires of what your expectations are for the trip. So really encourage you to look at some of these items, and then I'll walk you through some of my general points that I considered in my trip planning. I spent almost a month in Baja California Sur, and I'd like to walk you through that process that I went through. Of course, I'd love any comments, feedback that you might have. Thanks, and have a great day. Hello friends, Duncan back again. And as mentioned, I want to do something a little different this time. I wanted to go through a short presentation I put together regarding what I think are some of the key factors in trip planning for the first time, and specifically as it relates to Baja California. So an important aspect I mentioned there in the intro was the expectation versus reality of your trip and your adventure that you're about to go on. And I think part of that is to do as much research as possible to look at some of the places where you're thinking about going or thinking about staying, and just doing a lot of research on them to make sure that that is the type of experience that you're looking for. One of the resources that I use pretty often is the TripAdvisor website. There's a lot of user reviews that are posted there. I think one thing I've realized is that some people will never be happy, so realize you're going to look at the good and the bad of all the different things, and at the end of the day, make up your own decision about if that is the type of experience that you're looking for. A lot of guidebooks out there, a lot of maps, certainly Facebook. There's a lot of user groups that are out there. I know I've joined quite a number of them that have been very helpful for me, so that when I took my trip to Baja California Sur, basically I had a closer alignment between my expectations of the trip and what actually happened, the reality of the trip. And the more those two things come together, the more satisfied you're going to be with your visit. So I've got 4 aspects I'd like to talk about briefly. The first one is, of course, budget. However, these 4 topics are not in any specific order, and certainly they all play together in your final decision. And so some budget considerations that you need to keep in mind is if you're going to fly, of course, airfare. There is one major airport in Los Cabos, down near Cabo San Lucas, and some minor regional airports scattered around. So how you're going to get around is certainly a main point, and also the budget that goes with that. Hotels. You've got quite the range of hotels in Baja, like everywhere else, from camping on some beaches, boondocking that's free, all the way up to 5-star resorts that are all-inclusive, and the sky's the limit in terms of your daily budget for the hotel. Next would be transportation. So whether you're thinking about driving your private vehicle or getting a rental car, certainly that's a consideration there, the cost of that. Also the cost of fuel. And let me just mention that my entire trip, I had a rental car, and I had absolutely no problem at all with any of the gas stations refueling. So don't be concerned about that. I typically went to the more well-known, so certainly the Pemex stations was one of the main places that I ended up going to. Tolls, there are some tolls here and there. And then finally, parking, either the cost of parking on a daily basis from the hotel that you might be staying at, or another important consideration is the security of your vehicle while it is parked at the hotel, and whether or not they have a gate that locks at night, for example, or security monitoring, whatever the case might be. So food, certainly restaurants, sky's the limit there. I don't typically really eat breakfast, so I'd have a cup of coffee or something, light lunch somewhere, and then a dinner somewhere. So, it's really, the sky's the limit, all the way from taco stands on the side of the road all the way up to, again, 5-star service. And then the cost of excursions. So a lot of opportunities for excursions, whether that's out on the water or on the beach somewhere, or more adventure-oriented with UTVs, scuba diving, for example. Lots of opportunities there. Next point is destinations, and for me, I had really already narrowed it down to the fact that I wanted to go to Mexico. I specifically wanted to go to Baja, and I wanted to go to southern Baja. So Baja California Sur, which you'll see abbreviated as BCS. And I had already pretty much narrowed down my search. And what you see in this overview map here is quite a number of the cities. Cabo San Lucas in the south, up to La Paz and everything in between. So that really can help narrow your search down by looking at the region that you want to go and determine what cities specifically you want to visit. And with those cities, to keep in mind, there are some differences that you should research and you should look at. And the first one, for example, is culture. You've got two cities in Baja California Sur that have been designated as pueblos mágicos, or magic cities, by the Mexican government due to their unique combination of art and culture and people and food, and generally they're very tourist friendly to more rural cities, towns, pueblos, all the way up to, on the far end of the spectrum, Cabo San Lucas. So there's really quite a variety of different culture that you should consider in your trip planning. Weather is going to be generally fairly uniform. However, you do have the Sea of Cortez on the East Coast and the Pacific on the West Coast. And one specific topic to certainly be aware of is hurricane season. So during my trip, actually had the back end of one hurricane at the beginning, and then had another hurricane on the other end of it. And certainly that can close a lot of businesses. The ports can be closed, for example, which would curtail any water activity or anything like that. Beaches, there's one thing that really impressed me about Mexico is the variety of geography. So everywhere from nice flat sandy beaches, and Cerritos Beach comes immediately to mind. Then on the other hand, very rocky, wild shores in other locations. So excursions, so there's a lot of excursions that are offered. The main topic that comes to mind right now as I'm recording this here in January is, of course, whale watching, a lot of great locations for gray whales on the west coast up near Guerrero Negro, or on the east coast with whale sharks or other types of things. So a lot of opportunities for really interacting with the wildlife. Scuba diving, for example, is offered in many of these locations, especially on the east coast from Cabo on up through Loreto. Hotels, a lot of options there, as mentioned, basic all the way up to all-inclusive, and a lot of restaurant options as well. So next topic is transportation. So, some considerations for you is certainly airport accessibility. There's, if you're flying in and you're going to get a rental car, certainly there's lots of options to get in and out to make sure that you're readily accessible to the airport, which is not a problem in Baja California Sur. Basically, your worst case, you're probably 4 or 5 hours away from the airport, no matter where you are in Baja California Sur. Next thing is flexibility. So, the worst thing is to get a rental car and have it sit in the parking lot for a week and you don't touch it. So how flexible do you want to be in terms of being able to go out and grab a car and go to a location or travel from city to city? There's also a very reliable bus services in Baja California Sur that you can certainly get around without an issue. Rental car is also a key thing. Definitely, if you're going to get a rental car, book online. Make sure that you have a clear overview of what all the charges are. You typically will have to get the mandatory insurance, and I know when I went down before, I had really no issues with that. Navigation, just to point out that there will be some locations where you will not have cell service. So I actually had a couple of different navigation devices with me. I had one dash mount Garmin device that works off satellite, in addition to using Waze and Google Maps, and that really was no problem. I had lots of redundancy there for navigating and getting around, so really no issues there. Road conditions definitely can be an issue. There are a lot of unpaved roads. I recall a trip that I made around to Cabo Pulmo, where a lot of washboard road conditions, or one excursion that I made from Todos Santos out to a fantastic restaurant called The Green Room, where you'll definitely be in a definitely unpaved situation. Parking, I mentioned, you need to be cognizant of where you're going to park your rental car and make sure that it has proper security. That was one thing that I definitely checked on to make sure that all the locations had a good, secure parking location for my vehicle. And of course, you never want to leave anything out visible. You always want to put everything away, lock it in the trunk, so don't leave any opportunities there for theft. So, and then the fourth topic is how much time you want to take, and I think an important thing for me is what I like to call the pace of the trip. So I for my trip, I didn't want to plan every day that I'm leaving on an excursion at 6 o'clock in the morning and I get back at midnight, and then I'm repeating that for multiple days. So I think the pace of the trip is important, and to think about what kind of excursions and experiences that you want to have, and how you can, in essence, sprinkle those across the entire duration of the trip, so that you can then create a balance of, let's say, hard days or more schedule-packed days versus easy days, where maybe it's a little more laid back, maybe it's a beach day, that type of thing. But basically using your time planning to kind of create opportunities to relax and refresh and really enjoy. And then the final point here is really just the travel and driving time, which typically is not a big deal. You'll be within a couple of hours of most of the main cities within Baja California Sur. So those are the four topics that I really wanted to cover today: budget, destinations, transportation, and time. And as I said at the onset, they're really not in a specific order, and they're really iterative, that you start off with a general idea, and then as you go through the process of looking at these four things, you eventually get to a point where you have a plan, and then you can start locking in your reservations for the various locations. So I envisioned this as being maybe an intro to the trip that I took, and I wanted to give you some background into some of the factors that went into my planning, how I ended up in organizing my trip. And I had thought about maybe that there could be possible other chapters, if you will, on this topic, to really dig into where I ended up with these four things. And for example, what cities did I select? How did I get around with my rental car? What kind of excursions? And importantly as well, keeping an eye on the budget. So I thought those could be maybe follow-on vlog topics. And so the question to you is, what interests you? What would you like to hear about? That if I am going to put some time into developing this, what would be beneficial to you? What are you interested in your trip planning? And I'd love to have your feedback. So I want to thank you if you've hung around here to the end. Hopefully it hasn't been too long, but I really do want to thank you for listening in here today, and I hope that this content has some value for you. There's some things maybe that you can relate to, or maybe that you hadn't thought about. And if so, I would really appreciate if you could like and subscribe to the channel, and that helps me to advance the channel and to produce additional content. So thank you, and hope you have a great day.